Hello, and welcome to today's workshop, The Truth About Liver Cancer, produced by Blue Fairy, the Adrian Wilson Liver Cancer Association. A nonprofit organization, Blue Fairy's mission is to prevent, treat, and cure primary liver cancer, specifically hepatocellular carcinoma, also known as HCC, through research, education, and advocacy. I founded the organization in memory of my younger sister, Adrienne, whom I raised from the time she was 8 years old until her untimely death from HCC at age 15. Today's workshop focuses on enrolling in clinical trials. We are going to do a deep dive into what clinical trials are and how to search for one. Plus, we have a very special guest who participated in a clinical trial that saved her life. Now, before we get started, I want to walk you through some of the features of the platform. First of all, we have a poll and it's asking right now, what is your relationship to HCC? Now, some of you may have already answered the poll. We've had it up since the registration began, but we would like to know, are you a current or former patient with the disease? Current or former caregiver for a loved one with the disease? Current healthcare provider? Patient advocate for those with the disease, or perhaps other, none of the above apply to you, which is perfectly fine. So we are going to leave this poll up for a little while and please answer it. It really helps us to better understand our audience. Also, you're going to notice a chat feature just like you would on Zoom or other platforms, and we highly encourage you to participate in the chat. Our program manager, Allison, is standing by if you have any questions. Allison, would you say hi to everyone in the chat, please, so they know who you are? We also have a Q&A feature. Thanks, Allison. We have a Q&A feature, which is different from the chat. So we do a Q&A at the top of the hour. So if you have any questions as we go through our presentation, our talk with our amazing speaker, and the live demo we're going to do, please put it in the Q&A. That way, other people can see your question and they can upvote the question if they like. So please stand by for that. Now, let's get started with our presentation. And again, if you have any questions during our talk, please throw them in any questions for the platform, throw them in the chat and Allison can respond. She's standing by. But if you have questions about the actual topic, put them in the Q&A so others can see them and upvote them. Allison, let's keep the first poll up for just a little bit longer before we do the second poll. All right, let's get started with our presentation. The Truth About Liver Cancer. This is a program we have where we do workshops throughout the year, 5 to 6 with different topics. And as I said, we're going to talk about enrolling in clinical trials. And in the meantime, I'm going to hide the chat so I'm not distracted by it. The first question we need to ask is, what is a clinical trial? So let's define that term. Clinical trials are scientific experiments. They are designed to determine whether a new treatment is effective and safe for a specific condition. I want you to remember those two words, effective and safe. And they want to see if that new treatment, how it compares to existing treatments, or if there's no treatment at all, which was definitely the case for HCC. For so many years, there were no treatments for advanced disease. Now, with clinical trials, the process is required for all new treatments to get FDA approval and become available to the public. All of the patients who participate in clinical trials are volunteers, and all medical treatments go through this process, including preventive and diagnostic procedures, as well as curative therapies like drugs, which will be our primary focus today. Trials may also test new combinations of existing therapies or the addition of a new element to an existing treatment. And we'll talk about what that means as well. And please say hello in the chat. So this is a word map of clinical trials. It can be a bit overwhelming, but I just want to highlight a couple of words. You'll see the word safety, Vaccines. All vaccines have to go through the clinical trial process to get FDA approval. You'll see stages. We're going to talk about the different stages or phases of clinical trials. You'll see the word government. Clinical trials can be sponsored by the government or they can be sponsored by a private company, such as a pharmaceutical company. And for the purposes of today, we are primarily talking about clinical trials in the US, and because outside the US, they might work a little differently. And you'll also see participants. Participants are absolutely key to the success of clinical trials. Without you, the patient volunteering, new treatments will not be developed. So you are so desperately needed. Let's discuss reasons why you might want to participate in a clinical trial. You could benefit from a new treatment, especially if existing treatments have not worked for you. You actually receive more attentive care as clinical trials require close observation and follow up from a team of doctors. They are very strictly monitored. You may receive partial compensation for treatment, travel, or related participation cost. Now, this is so important. You'll hear me say it more than once. You must ask the trial sponsor about full compensation. Most of the time, your insurance, if you have insurance, may not cover the cost of any investigational drug. So you always want to ask about compensation. And furthermore, you, the patient, are contributing to the future of cancer treatment as clinical trials are an essential part of making progress in cancer treatment and actually in any treatment for any disease. So if you're not here for liver cancer or even cancer, this can still apply to you. The number one barrier to the completion of clinical trials is the lack of people, the lack of volunteers, the lack of patients. So the clinical trial process really, really needs you. I want you to remember this. And when people ask for my advice, especially specifically to HCC, I always say clinical trials should be considered a first option, not a last resort, especially if your cancer is advanced or even worse, has no known treatment. So I'm going to say that again because it is so critical. Clinical trials should be considered a first option, not a last resort, especially if your cancer is advanced or there's no known treatment. And here's why. If you don't look at clinical trials right away and you go through treatments, depending on what you do, it might make you ineligible in the future for a clinical trial. So, again, this is not for curative cancers or diseases. I'm talking about if you have a very advanced stage of cancer and there is no known treatment. Um, or, again, if it's advanced, look at clinical trials first. Now, there are some risks to participating in clinical trials, and we're going to walk through them. Clinical trials test new treatments. So there's no way your doctor can predict the outcome before treatment begins. The new treatment, it may not work as well as existing ones, which is why people often do existing therapies first. Also, the new treatment may have unanticipated side effects. And that we'll talk about the phases of clinical trials and what that entails when it comes to side effects. You need to calculate the time and money cost. This is so critical because you may need to travel to the treatment center where the trial is being conducted. In fact, you almost always have to go to the treatment center. And you may have to cover part of the cost associated with the trial. Now, almost always, the actual medication is covered by the trial sponsor, whether it's the federal government, again, here in the US, or private companies such as pharmaceutical companies or biotechs. But doesn't mean all of your cost will be covered. So before you commit to participating in a clinical trial, you have to discuss all the cost with your insurance provider and with the trial sponsor. Ask, is the cost of my travel covered? If I have to stay overnight, is my lodging covered? Ask everything what is covered. So important. And they have to be 100% transparent with you. Again, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A and I encourage you to interact with each other in the live chat. If you're watching this in the future on our YouTube channel, please feel free to comment and we will get back to you. I also want you to remember that not accepting medical treatment is a valid choice. It's a very brave one, too. And some would argue that that's a method of treatment. It is very difficult to say that you do not want treatment. I know of a couple, and ultimately they decided to stop treatment because the treatment her husband was undergoing was killing him. And it wasn't curative, it was palliative in nature. So it was meant to extend his life, but not cure the disease. And once he stopped treatment, he actually did quite well. And he lived over a year. His pain was managed and had a very normal, productive life. So it's okay to say no to medical treatment. Just please keep that in mind. It's something I personally wish I had known all those years ago when my sister was diagnosed. Now we're going to talk and do a deep dive into the different phases of clinical trials. There are four of them. But first, there are a couple of things to know. Before a treatment is tested in humans, before even that phase 1 trial, it has to go through testing with cells and with animals to show that it's safe and likely effective. So often these treatments are done in what's called mouse models. So they treat mice first before they ever bring a treatment to humans. In most trials, there's always an experimental group that receives the new treatment and a control group that does not. Now, that may not seem fair, and I agree, but it is essential for an unbiased judgment of the results. If you are selected for the control group, this does not mean that you will receive no treatment unless there's no known treatment for your disease. Instead, you will likely receive the standard therapy for your condition. Now, there is placebo. If you're in a placebo trial, you are not receiving the treatment. I am seeing fewer placebo trials these days across the board, but especially in primary liver cancer. And that's because most patients are reluctant to participate in a placebo trial. Placebo means that you're not getting medication, but you may think you are. And often these are what's called blinded. So often you don't know, and even the doctor doesn't know if you're getting the treatment or not. And some people do well on placebo trials because your brain is so powerful and thinks you're getting the drug. But as a general recommendation, and again, we can't give medical advice, but general recommendation, we discourage you to participate in a placebo trial. We would much rather you see either get the new treatment or the standard of care. Now, let's do a deep dive into these four phases. And I want you to keep them in mind when we have our incredible guest speaker coming up shortly. Phase 1, the goal is to identify the safe dose for future trials. Phase 1, it's all about safety. They are typically conducted in major cancer centers with very small groups of people under close observation during treatment. Phase 1 trials have what's called a high risk and low benefit. High risk because they have no idea if it's going to be effective for your particular cancer or disease. They're also testing the doses, so they don't know exactly what the safest dose is yet. And that's why there's can be a very low benefit. However, I know someone, he was patient number 1 in a phase one trial, and it saved his life. So don't dismiss a phase one trial out of hand. Phase two trials, the goal is to determine if the treatment is effective for specific types of cancer or your disease. Again, this is not specific, it doesn't have to be specific to cancer. Phase two, it's all about efficacy. Is this going to work on the disease that you have? Usually, this is a larger group, anywhere from 25 to 100 patients, and they are not comparing the new treatment to placebo or any existing treatment. And these are typically conducted in major cancer centers or other treatment sites. This has what's called a medium risk. So it's not as risky as a phase one because they know what the safe dose is, but it still can have a low benefit because they have no idea if it's going to be effective for your type of cancer or disease. Now, phase three trials are the big trials because you've gone through phase one, safety, you've gone through phase two, efficacy, and now they are comparing this new treatment to the current standard of care. And then they present the findings to the FDA for approval. Phase three trials are conducted in multiple treatment sites, often around the world, with several hundred patients. Phase three is considered low risk because you've already gotten through the safety of phase one and the efficacy of phase two, and anywhere from medium to high benefit. So you will see a lot of phase three trials because at this point, they're trying to see, can we get this new treatment approved for this specific condition? Now there are phase four trials. Phase four, the goal is to test dosages, treatment schedules, or applications of existing treatments of FDA approved drugs. And this can include thousands of patients around the world and all kinds of treatment centers, major hospitals, clinics. They have the absolute lowest risk because you have already gone through, again, the safety of phase one, the efficacy of phase two. You've gone through the FDA approval of phase three, which is the hardest part, but they also have low benefit because the drug that you're receiving is already available. It's already FDA approved. However, I want to tell you about the time I participated in a phase four trial and why I did. A year after my sister died, I raised her. So she was not only my sister, she was my child. I was deeply depressed. I was 30 years old. I had no health insurance, and I knew I needed help. So I started looking for clinical trials in my area, and I lived in Los Angeles at the time. And I found a phase four trial that was testing antidepressants. And again, this was about they were testing different dosages, different populations. So the drug was already readily available. And if I had health insurance, I would have been able to get it, but I didn't. Also, I really wanted to be closely monitored. I had never been on an antidepressant, and I was concerned about my mental health. So I enrolled in a phase four clinical trial at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. It lasted 12 weeks. I was compensated $35 a week. Now, it took up about 3 hours of my week because it was LA and I didn't live near Cedars-Sinai. So I would drive to Cedars-Sinai once a week at the same time, take about 45 minutes to an hour to get there, spend an hour there talking to the person about how I was feeling, filling out surveys, and then I would drive the 45 minutes to an hour to get home. And I feel so lucky to have participated in that trial, even though that $35 sort of just covered gas and a little bit of my time. But for me, it was an opportunity to get access to a new medication and also be closely supervised the whole time. So don't dismiss a phase four trial. They do have their benefits. Now, here's a hot tip. Compassionate use. Compassionate use is the use of an investigational medical product outside of a clinical trial. So we actually applied for compassionate use. I'm so sorry, I'm very hoarse today, guys. We applied for compassionate use for my sister because she wasn't eligible for the trial, but we wanted to get access to the drug, and she was approved for compassionate use. This does take time, by the way, but it can be done. Now let's discuss the difference between experimental drugs and off label use because these are different. There are some cases where expanded access programs make drugs in clinical trials, so again, not FDA approved, we're not talking about phase 4, available to patients for whom no other treatment has worked. So, such patients have to have a life threatening condition, have no alternative treatment, and not be eligible for the clinical trial involving the drug. So, again, this often goes back to applying for compassionate use. That way, you get access to the drug. It's experimental, it's not FDA approved, but you're not able to participate in the trial. There's also a thing called off label use, and this is very common. Drugs are sometimes prescribed for off label use, meaning they're approved by the FDA, but they're not approved for that specific cancer or condition. And in fact, this is how Viagra came into existence. It started with off label use. Off label use is completely legal. However, most insurance companies will not cover it. They will require special approval before they'll cover the drug cost. So, if your doctor says to you they want to give you a drug, again, for any condition, and it's off label use, before you say, yes, write me that prescription, if you have health insurance, make sure that's going to be covered. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But if it is covered, usually there are some special approvals you have to go through to get it. Now, here's a hot tip. I want to tell you about PAPs, and I don't mean pap smears, I mean patient assistance programs. They exist and they will often cover drug cost. Most pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies have patient assistance programs, but your doctor may not talk about them. So, for example, I know a couple that the initial drug prescribed for her husband was not covered by Medicare. So, she applied for the patient assistance program and got the cost of the drug covered. They are out there. And in fact, in our patient resource guides on the very last page, we list all the patient assistance programs that we're personally aware of for hepatocellular carcinoma or HCC. But there are PAPs for all types of cancer and diseases. So don't be afraid to ask about them. Let's talk briefly about eligibility criteria. This can be very tricky. And as you see, we'll do a demo later. You'll see what I mean. Inclusion criteria. What this means is there are key features of the target population that investigators will use to answer their research question. Will this new drug be more effective for HCC, for example? Typical inclusion criteria can include demographic, clinical, and geographic characteristics. Exclusion criteria, however, is different. So there can be key features of the potential study participants who meet the inclusion criteria, but present with additional characteristics that could interfere with the success of the study or increase the risk for an unfavorable outcome. And I know how unfair that sounds. It is, it's absolutely unfair. Common exclusion criteria can include comorbidities that could bias the results of the study or increase the risk for adverse events. Adverse events, by the way, is medical jargon for side effects. That's what they mean by adverse events. So, for example, if you have HCC and you also have diabetes, diabetes might be an exclusion criteria. So, you would not be eligible for that particular clinical trial. And this will make more sense when we do the demo later. How to find a clinical trial, so stay tuned. Blue Fairy has a custom HCC specific clinical trial tool, and it pulls all the data from clinicaltrials.gov, but it's so much easier to use. So stay tuned for that demo, which we will have after our guest speaker. These are all the resources that we used for this particular presentation. And as always, we want to say thank you so much. Stand by, our speaker's coming up. If you want to contact Blue Fairy, if you have any inquiries or concerns, reach out to us at bluefairy.org. Email us at info@bluefairy.org. That's BLUEFAERY.org. You can also call us in the States, 818-636-5624. And Blue Fairy has offices virtually in Birmingham, where I live, and Burbank, California. That's Birmingham, Alabama, not the UK. And this is our quick medical disclaimer. We have to put this out there. We are not giving medical advice. We are just trying to educate you about clinical trials. And with that, we are going to remove these slides from the stage. I got to figure out how to do this. Let's see. I may need your help, Allison, in getting the slides off the stage. I think that does it. And we are going to bring our guest speaker on. I am so excited to have her. Allison, please bring Melinda to the stage. Melinda Bachini is a 14-year survivor of cholangiocarcinoma. That is a type of cancer, liver cancer in the bile ducts. She was treated at the National Cancer Institute with a clinical trial using adoptive cell therapy. Her personal experience with previous and current treatments allows for great insights into patients participating in clinical trials. Melinda was a patient advocate for the NCI Hepatobiliary Task Force and the NCI Patient Advocate Steering Committee. Currently, she serves on the ECOG Akron GI Committee, ECOG Akron Cancer Research Advocacy Committee, NCI Council of Research Advocates, and the NCCN Hepatobiliary Guidelines Panel. In other words, Melinda is an expert. Melinda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Andrea. So happy to be here.
All right, would you please take us back to the beginning? Where did all of this start for you?
Yes. So just a little over 14 years ago, I was working as a paramedic and started having some side effects, symptoms I didn't know at the time were related to anything. Some right shoulder pain. I had some upper epigastric pain and a lot of fatigue. Um, my doctor thought I might have gallstones, and that led to an ultrasound, which ultimately led to finding a 13 by 9 centimeter tumor on my liver.
Wow.
Yeah. At first, they thought it was probably a benign hemangioma, but further testing and a biopsy proved that it was cancer, initially diagnosed with cancer of unknown primary.
Wow. How did they find out what type of cancer it was?
So, fortunately, the tumor was confined to my liver, and I was able to have surgery. So at that point, after they removed the tumor, they did say they had clean margins. And for cholangiocarcinoma, which is what they suspected it to be, but didn't confirm it until after that surgery, um, surgery is the only potential curative option, potentially curative. I say that because there is a high risk of recurrence for this cancer. So after the surgery, they did send the tumor off and were able to confirm that it was intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma.
Wow. After the surgery, were there other treatments that you started?
No, I didn't do any adjuvant treatment after surgery. 14 years ago, I wasn't even given that option. Now it's pretty standard for adjuvant treatment to come after surgery to help prevent recurrence. Um, but 3 months after my surgery, I went for my first postoperative scan, and unfortunately, the cancer returned in my lungs. So it was,
Wow.
yeah, it was at that point I was labeled a stage 4 terminal cancer patient. and I was 41, and I have
Oh.
6 children. You can see on the back of my wall here. And, yes, so I knew at that time that if I wanted to find a way to beat it, it had to be something new because what was available wasn't curative. There was palliative chemo only. And so I started looking for clinical trials. I remember asking my doctor to be aggressive and look for clinical trials, and he did. He found one. But unfortunately, my health insurance at that time, would not cover the standard of care costs that went into participating in a clinical trial. And I didn't even know that that could happen. As a patient,
Yeah.
not very familiar with clinical trials at all, definitely not familiar with cancer, cholangiocarcinoma. Um, it totally pulled the rug out from under my feet. I felt like, oh, there might be a new opportunity for a new treatment. And then that opportunity was taken away. I could have chosen to, financially pay for the standard of care costs on my own, but I didn't want to leave my family in any financial distress. So I didn't go with that clinical trial, and I just started with the standard of care palliative treatment, gemcitabine and cisplatin chemotherapy.
What was that like? Because I think that is, that's a term that most people associate with cancer. What was that chemotherapy like, and how long did you do it?
Yeah, I had a lot of side effects. I, speak to a lot of patients who do really well with chemo. I was not one of them. I definitely had a lot of side effects. I did the gemcitabine and cisplatin for about 6 months until the toxicity built up. They took the cisplatin away, and the cancer spread from my lungs back to my liver. So
Mm.
then they tried one other chemotherapy regimen, Taxotere, which again didn't have any success, but more side effects. And so that was about 18 months of on and off chemo with those three different regimens. And then I came to the point in my journey of being diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma that I wanted quality of life more than quantity, which was a super hard decision to make with having 6 children. I didn't want them to think I was giving up or that it wasn't worth suffering through the side effects. But my quality of life was so poor at that time that I stopped all treatments.
Wow. What were you doing as a career at this point in your life?
So at that point in my life, I was no longer working as a paramedic. The side effects from all the chemotherapy um, were too harsh to continue working. So I was home on disability insurance and not working. Um, but it was also at that time, I always tell patients, you can make these decisions and then tomorrow, another decision might come along. So
Mm.
I chose no more treatment, but I happened to stumble upon a clinical trial that I read, and I looked at my husband and I think, I think we should try this. It has the initial chemotherapy to wipe out your immune system, but then after that, it's your immune system working. And at that point, I thought, what do I have to lose? I have nothing to lose. It didn't have the chemotherapy because if it would have been a clinical trial with chemotherapies, it wouldn't have interested me.
Right,
And
because you'd
so,
already done that.
yeah, so we made the phone call. Actually, we took it into my local oncologist and said, this is what we want to do. And he said, I'll support you in whatever you want to do, but typically we work with the University of Denver because I'm from Montana, and it's the closest university here that they probably collaborate with on different clinical trials.
Where was this particular trial that you found?
This one was located at the National Cancer Institute in Bethesda, Maryland, and I said, no, this is what I want to do. And my husband and I did all the work. We gathered my medical records, got the blood samples, sent everything off to the NCI, and waited for the washout period. That was part of the inclusion criteria.
Would you tell people what that means? What is washout period? Because that just sounds like laundry for most of us.
Yes. So the washout period means that you had to have been off treatment for 30 days. Um,
Mm.
So we got to that point, and I was off treatment for 30 days, sent in my latest scan. And for the first time in that 18 months of being diagnosed, I had no progression, which meant I did not qualify for this clinical trial because part of the inclusion criteria said,
No.
yes, said I had to have progressed to be eligible. And again, I remember
Oh,
the rug
no.
pulled out from under my feet. Um, my husband picked up the phone and said, she's going to progress. It's
Yeah.
going to happen. She's not on treatment. It's going to happen. And, can we at least come out there? And so they did accept us to come out for a consultation. And by the time we got out for a consultation and they did scans again, there was progressions. So I did qualify and was able to enroll in the trial.
So what were the next steps of enrolling? Um, the actual sort of step by steps. What was the phase of the trial? And I mean, you had that washout period, but tell us a little bit more about the actual trial itself.
Absolutely. So at the time it was called the TIL trial, the tumor infiltrating lymphocytes is what TIL stands
Okay.
for GI cancer. It was a solid tumor TIL trial. It wasn't specific to cholangiocarcinoma, but it was a solid tumor trial. It was in phase 2. But again, what attracted me to it was that there wasn't chemotherapy. It was my immune system doing the work. So I felt like there wouldn't be a lot of toxicity.
Mm.
It The biggest thing that attracted me to it is it was at the National Cancer Institute, which is a federally funded research institute, and that all the medical costs would be covered.
Oh wow. You say that again for everybody?
All the medical costs were covered because it was done at the National Cancer Institute, in which it's a federally funded research facility. So they covered the cost for me to travel from Montana to Bethesda,
Wow.
and all the medical costs were covered. Again, knowing that my insurance hadn't covered the first clinical trial that I'd had an option to, this to me was what, pretty much sealed the deal. It made it easy to have access where I didn't have access before. And it just felt like everything was falling into place. And we got out there. I remember going through the informed consent, which the informed consent is anywhere from probably a 20 to 50 page report of what the trial consists of. I think the informed consents have gotten a lot better over the last 14 years, which I'm happy to say. A lot of cancer advocates have worked on this. But the young fellow doctor who was explaining the informed consent to me ended every sentence with, "And you could die." And I was like, okay,
Every sentence?
almost every sentence. And I
Wow.
understand that, they have to explain the trial and the risks associated with it. But I looked at my husband and I said, I think she's trying to talk us out of it. And then the other doctor came in, the resident doctor came in and explained it in a little more jovial, I guess. I don't know, positive attitude, but it made all the difference in the world. So just balancing the risks with the possibilities to me makes all the difference for a patient's perspective and understanding that informed consent. And in all reality, I knew I was going to die anyway. So it wasn't that I felt like I was taking a big risk, and it probably would have never scared me away. And I was ready to move forward no matter what.
Wow. So, this is in Maryland. So what were the next steps?
Yes. So the first step is you have to have surgery. So they removed tumors from my lungs. They pull the T cells from those tumors that are naturally at the tumor trying to kill the cancer. They grow those T cells. Did I say that wrong? They pulled the T cells from the tumor. They grow those T cells in the lab into the billions, and then they put them back into you to target and fight the cancer. So surgery first, you go home to recover, they grow those cells, and then you go back for an inpatient stay of about 3 to 4 weeks.
Wow. So
Yeah,
you're in Maryland for a month essentially.
pretty much, which again is difficult to leave 6 children behind and
Yeah.
not worry about them. The good thing again about the National Cancer Institute is they do have a family lodge right next to the clinical center.
Oh, that's so
And
nice.
yeah, my husband was able to come. He was able to stay there. He was close, and made it really convenient. Uh, but the first week, they give you that chemo to wipe out your immune system to better prepare for those T cells. And then
Would you tell people why they do that?
yeah, they want to give those T cells a chance to grow and to multiply without any immune response from the normal T cells that are there, that your
Got it.
normal white blood cells and everything that are there. And then They give you the drug IL-2, which is what those T cells are grown in. They explained it to me. It's like food for those T cells. But
Huh.
that drug had some nasty side effects as well. And then the third and fourth week, you're recovering your immune system enough to be able to go home.
What were some of the side effects you experienced
Yes.
from
So
that drug?
with the IL-2, I had extreme water weight gain, like 20 pounds overnight. I was only able to do about 4 doses of the IL-2, and then they had to stop it because my lungs were starting to fill up with fluid.
Oh gosh. How were how were your red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets? Because I know that's constantly monitored when you're treating cancer.
Yeah, so after the immunodepleting chemo, all that was wiped out, and it took some time for everything to start coming back to normal ranges. That last 2 weeks in the hospital gave my body a chance to reboot and to get my white blood cells and red blood cells back to the normal level. I did end up having quite a few blood transfusions, platelet transfusions. My platelets were having a hard time coming up, but eventually my body kicked in, and I was able to go home.
Wow. So during that first year, what was the follow-up process like for you?
Yes. So the great thing about this treatment is it's pretty intensive, that the 3 to 4 weeks in the hospital, but then after that, there's no other treatment. And so
That's crazy, right?
I
That's
know,
just crazy.
I know it's a one-time treatment. So when I entered into this trial, I had tumors all over both my lungs and all over my liver, and I had a chronic cough. I could barely walk 5 steps without coughing.
Really?
Um,
Oh, Melinda, I didn't know that.
And then I do remember at the end of that hospital stay, my cough went away, and I just felt like something was working. I was pretty optimistic that something was going on there. And so for the first year, I went back monthly. I flew back every month from Montana to Maryland to get scans and blood work. And I was the ninth person to enter into that trial, the first one with cholangiocarcinoma, and the first one to have a response.
Wow. Did you meet other people in the trial?
I did I did end up going through this treatment twice, only
Okay.
because after the first treatment, they studied my T cells and were able to discover that one of my T cells was reactive to one of my mutations.
Oh,
So
interesting.
after the first treatment, the cancer started to grow again, but they wanted to retreat me with that specific T cell. So I went back again a year and a half later, and same treatment all over again, surgery, grow them in the lab, go back for 3 to 4 weeks in the hospital. But this time they were treating me with 3 times as many of those T cells, and those T cells were specific to that mutation. So it was a more personalized treatment. And
That's
this,
incredible.
yeah, it was super incredible. The second time around, I had an even bigger response. And because of that, they published it in the Science Journal. And then media got a hold of it, and my story kind of went around the world overnight. It was crazy. But in that first week, I heard from hundreds of cancer patients all over the world. They
Oh,
just wanted to have hope. They just
right,
a possibility. They
right.
didn't need to know that this specific treatment would work for them. They just needed to know there was possibilities out there. And that's when I started connecting with patients again all over the world. And that's when I think my love for patient advocacy was born. And
When did you first experience patient advocacy?
so my first experience with patient advocacy was when my insurance denied me to participate in that clinical trial.
That first one, right?
Yes, so way back at the beginning, I went to the Capitol in Montana with some other cancer patients. We told our story, and we were able to get a law passed that said that insurance companies in the state of Montana had to cover the standard of care costs if you wanted to participate in a clinical trial for cancer patients. And it was at that
Wow,
time,
that's
yeah,
amazing.
you know, it was the first time I realized if you share your story, it could make a difference. And so, definitely my
Absolutely.
first taste of advocacy. And then back to where we were after my second treatment, I started volunteering with the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation. I wanted to give patients hope and let them know there were possibilities out there. There's nothing special about me. And if it can work for me, there's a possibility that it could work for anyone. So I started volunteering as a moderator on the discussion board, and just, trying to give patients help with navigating clinical trials, and just letting them know there could be other possibilities out there.
How did you get more involved in the research side of things?
Yes. So as I came on as a volunteer with the foundation, I had a, a mentor who was a patient advocate with the foundation, and she had served on the NCI Hepatobiliary Task Force, and her term has come to an end, and she had nominated me to serve in her place. And that was my first taste of research advocacy, and that's where I think I met you, Andrea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Um, I really, really wanted to understand more about the research side of clinical trials, the process, to be able to help patients more, and have more of an understanding of what we could do as advocates. But mostly, I wanted to bring the voice of the patient to the clinical trial side. I wanted to make sure the patient's voice was being heard, and that the researchers took into consideration what's important to patients.
Oh, God, that's amazing. And would you share with everyone what you do now at the foundation?
Yes. So after I started volunteering with the foundation, I came on as a full-time employee about 5 years after volunteering. So I am the current chief patient officer with the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation, and I work with patients and caregivers every single day. Again, still representing the voice of the patient, but we provide support, education, resources, tools. We help them search for clinical trials. We just help them navigate this diagnosis, because it's pretty devastating and it's pretty overwhelming. And so we just want to be able to help them in any way we can.
Oh, God, that's amazing. And I remember when I met you, we just clicked immediately. And do you know what happened in the clinical trial that you participated in?
Yes. So the solid tumor clinical trial is still in trial there, and it's
Wow.
actually in trial in many different areas now. So it's moved from the National Cancer Institute to different institutions. But I recently saw last month that the FDA approved the TIL treatment for melanoma cancer patients. Um, and so that's pretty exciting. That's one approval. They're
Yeah.
still working on solid tumors. Again, trying to figure out why it works for some patients and not others, I think, is the big question, as it is for, I think, most treatments. I think we're all so different. We're also, we all, even though we might be diagnosed with the same cancer, our cancer is made up with different mutations, and there's different genetic or genomic reasons. And I just think that each treatment is personal to each patient. But it is still in clinical trial. They're still working on the solid tumor part of it. There's been several other responses besides me, not specific to cholangiocarcinoma. And it's not about the cancer type, it's more about your immune system doing the work. But the patients who have had complete responses like me have had incredible stories too. And so I pray every day that they figure out why it works for everyone, because I want nothing more than for everyone else to be here 14 years later.
Yeah, and I love this idea. I mean, we all sort of think this idea of our immune system working for us, and
Yes.
helping us fight the disease that's inside our bodies. Melinda, you are amazing. I think you're amazing. We are going to put you back in the audience, but we are going to bring you back at the top of the hour after we do this demo of our clinical trial finder tool. So thank you so much. Please stick around.
I
And Allison, if you would please put the link. So we do have a worksheet, and we will put this, if you're watching this on YouTube, we will put this in the description for YouTube. We do have a link to our clinical trial vocabulary term worksheet that we created for you, because a lot of this terminology can be new. But for right now, we are going to do a demo of Blue Fairy's custom clinical trial tool. Let's see. Oh, I just pushed a button that I did not want to push. Okay, let me share my screen. And I am going to Blue Fairy. That's again BLUEFAERY.org. And I am going to go over to where it says Patients Clinical Trial. So I'm going to click there. And Allison, at any time, if I'm not sharing my screen, you just let me know. And here you can see our clinical trial tool, but you can also see clinical trials that we have listed. Now, if there is an asterisk by the trial, that is a paid listing, but these are all trials for HCC or for solid tumor that accept HCC patients. And if you scroll down, you'll see there are different phases now that you know what the different phases are. So we have some phase two trials, we have some phase 2B/2 trials, even if a phase one trial, and of course the phase three trial, which are the very big trials. But I'm going to scroll back up to the top of the page because we have this incredible tool. We thank Antidote for it. And what I love about this tool is it pulls all the same data from clinicaltrials.gov, which if we have time, I'll show you, but it's a lot easier to use. So we are going to do a demo of the tool. Let me make sure I'm sharing this tab now. So as you can see, it defaults to hepatocellular carcinoma. However, you can go to our website and click on this tool and you can change the disease right here. Let's say you have cholangiocarcinoma, change it to that, or diabetes, or melanoma, or whatever. But for ease of use for our audience, it defaults to hepatocellular carcinoma. So I just click submit. Now it's asking if I'm looking for trials for myself or someone else. And I want you to keep an eye here. Hopefully, you can see my mouse where it says 795 trials found. So, right now, there are 795 trials actively looking for participants in HCC. And this is from clinicaltrials.gov. So, this is worldwide. I'm going to choose someone else because often it's the caregiver, the spouse, or adult child who's doing this type of research. Click submit. Now they're asking for my zip code. And if you're ever curious why they're asking, they've got this great little info here. They're asking because trials are normally run by hospitals or treatment centers and often require a lot of visits. You heard from Melinda. She, for that initial treatment, had to stay in the hospital for 3 to 4 weeks in Maryland, and she lives in Montana. So they will try to find trials close to you. So I'm going to put in a zip code in my city. And so 35209. So this is Alabama. So watch how this number here, 795, is going to change drastically when I click submit. Bam, it went down to 137. Now, let's say that I'm willing to travel a pretty significant distance from my home. Let's say I'm willing to travel at least 60 miles from my home. Now, this is Birmingham and it's a very much a healthcare mecca. So there are a lot of opportunities for trials here. So I'm going to click 60. If you're willing and able to travel anywhere, click any. And again, they have a little info here if you're curious why they're asking the question. Now, look at that. Wow, the number went down to 7. 7. I'm willing to travel 60 miles, but there are only 7 trials for HCC within 60 miles. Now they're asking the age of the patient. Remember, I clicked I'm looking for someone else. And again, you can click this little info question. And they were asking for the age because sometimes that's part of the inclusion criteria. So I'm going to pick a little bit older since most HCC patients are over the age of 60. I'm going to put 65. Now they're asking biological sex. Now you notice that went from 7 trials to 6 just by me putting in the age. And again, if you're not sure why they're asking a particular question, it's right here. And this is really important, your biological sex. And you see there are only 2 options. So I'm going to pick male because HCC is more common in men than women. Now, I love this part. If you want personalized trial alerts based on the info you just put in, so far we put in HCC within 60 miles of 35209 and a 65-year-old male. You can put in your email and get personalized trial alerts. I highly recommend that you do this. Highly recommend. For the sake of this demo, I'm going to skip this part, but I just recommend that you do it. Now they're asking what best describes them in terms of ethnicity. And again, they will always tell you why they're asking this. Part of this is really to increase diversity in clinical trials more than anything else. But you can skip this question if you like. And I'm going to go ahead and skip it for today. And I've still got 6 trials. Now they're asking, does the patient currently have hepatitis B? They're asking that because hepatitis B is a common underlying condition for patients who develop HCC, especially in Asia and sub Saharan Africa or in Asian Americans. So that is why they're asking about hepatitis B. They wouldn't necessarily ask about hepatitis B for breast cancer, but there would be other questions. So I'm going to select no. Now, what's really nice here is you can also say, I don't know. That's fine too, or skip it altogether. Now they're asking, does the patient currently have an unstable angina, so a condition with the heart? And I'm going to say, you know what? I don't know. I'm not sure. They're asking if the patient has HIV. And again, this is really helping with that inclusion and exclusion criteria that we talked about earlier. And I'm going to say that this patient does not have HIV. And it's so far pretty consistent, still 6 trials. Does the patient currently have hepatitis C? That is another underlying common condition that can lead to primary liver cancer, especially in the US in the baby boomer population. So I'm going to say yes, just because I know so many patients that had hepatitis C. Now, watch what happens here. Let's see if this changes. Oh, it went from 6 to 3. So it's likely that there is some exclusion criteria. Those 3 trials that just disappeared are not accepting patients that have hepatitis C. Are they currently experiencing congestive heart failure? I'm going to say, I don't know. Do they currently have heart disease? And of course, they give you a lot of examples here. I'm going to say, I don't know. And you can watch our progress here. The circle on the left, there's always progress going on. So I'm almost to the end here. Do they currently have any other heart diseases? Again, they give you more examples. And this has to do with that inclusion exclusion criteria. I'm going to say, I don't know. And bam, they have found 3 trials based on the information that I have put in. So let's look at these. Um, there are 2 phase 2 trials. Remember, that's about efficacy, and 1 phase 3 trial where they know the combination is safe and effective, and they're testing it against standard of care. And look at this. All 3 of these trials are less than 5 miles away from the zip code that I put in. So you've got this trial. This is for recurrent HCC after liver transplant. This is a new combination they're testing called durvalumab and lenvatinib. Oh goodness, I can only say it. Lenvima is the brand name, in combination with TACE. So TACE is an actual procedure in patients with local regional HCC, and then they have one that sounds completely different, novel immunomodulators as a monotherapy, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to click on this first one, this phase 2 trial, just to show you what it looks like. So it tells you when it was last updated, which is super important. So it's been almost a year since this trial was last updated. It tells you who the study is for, what is being studied, that intervention they call it, the purpose, and usually the purpose is treatment. That's what you want. The sponsor. Now, this is a small phase 2 trial. They're only looking for 19 participants. And I really want you to pay attention to this. This is the unique study ID. So keep in mind that number, it's very important. Then you scroll down, it says it's open to males and females, and it shows the eligibility criteria. So look at this, all this inclusion criteria, a very long list, and then the exclusion criteria. Now, it's a good chance that just by taking the steps that we did using this tool that you meet the inclusion exclusion criteria. But if you remember, I said I don't know on a couple of those questions. So it's possible that my patient might not be right for this particular trial. It tells me the locations for the studies. So the one closest to my house, UAB, Emory University, and the Mayo Clinic in Arizona. Just going to scroll back up through all this inclusion and exclusion criteria. And then it says how to apply. So you want to get the contact details. So you can choose which site you want. And then it pops up. And this is where you need to put in your email, because what Antidote will do is send your information to the principal investigator. That's the person who's running the trial, so they can reach out and contact you about the trial. Now, I want to show you what this looks like quickly on clinicaltrials.gov before we go to our Q&A. And again, I'm going to copy and paste this particular unique study ID. I'm going to go to clinicaltrials.gov. Give me just a second to pull it up. And you will see it is not as user-friendly. So here's clinicaltrials.gov. Because I know that trial ID number, I'm just going to go to other terms here and copy and paste it in and click search. So it comes right up. And this is why I want to show you this, show you on clinicaltrials.gov. You can see it's actively recruiting. On clinicaltrials.gov, let's say you don't want to wait for the principal investigator to get in touch with you. You want to take action right now, just the way Melinda and her husband did. You can scroll down, and they have made this, believe it or not, more user friendly. It used to be a lot worse, but you can scroll down and go to contacts and locations. And what's great is that most of these doctors have this information. So this is the doctor to contact. He actually participated in our Love Your Liver program. I believe it was last year. There's a phone number and there's an email. And I say do all three. So put your email into Antidote in the clinical trial finder tool, but be proactive as well. Time is not on your side with cancer. It's not. So call and email and reach out right away. So that is how you use our clinical trial finder tool. Allison, would you please put that call to action button? Would you make that visible now so people can access that even after we are no longer live? And you will go straight back to this page here. It will take you here. And again, you can just click start and use that clinical trial finder tool. And as a reminder, this is defaulting to HTC because that's what Blue Fairy focuses on. But you can use this clinical trial finder tool for any disease. It's incredible. If you spend a lot of time on clinicaltrials.gov, you'll find it's not as easy to navigate. However, I will show you one more thing about clinicaltrials.gov that I do like really quickly. So I'm going to go back over to clinicaltrials.gov. I'm just going to go back to the beginning and I'm going to type in HCC, hepatocellular carcinoma. And this is why I like our tool better, because if you just type in the disease, let's go ahead and type in location. Now let me put in the same zip code and let's see what comes up. Search. It shows 44 studies, and that's because clinicaltrials.gov will show you all of the studies, not the ones that are currently recruiting, not only the ones that are currently recruiting. And so the reason I don't like this as much is because you have to go here on the sidebar and you have to check you want recruiting. You don't want active not recruiting. That doesn't help you. You don't want completed because those are over, and you don't want terminated. And often, as we talked about earlier in the presentation, clinical trials are terminated for lack of participants. But let's click on recruiting, apply filters, and it's showing 9. Now, why is it showing 9 when the tool gave us 3? Well, that's because the tool asked us a lot of questions to narrow it down. But I'm going to go back to the 3 studies we found here. And I know I'm still sharing clinicaltrials.gov, but what I'm going to do is the 3 studies we found. So I'm going to select them. So we found the ones after we went through the different questions. We found this one, that was the one we really did a deep dive on. And the other one we found with the questions we answered was Oh, where did it go? Let's see. This one. So I click these three, and I just, again, I want to show you one of the things I do love about clinicaltrials.gov. You click this little arrow, and you can download all the information you need into a CSV file, which is essentially an Excel file. And then you'll have a spreadsheet of all the trials you're eligible for. So that's where I think clinicaltrials.gov does a really great job. That way you have a spreadsheet and you and your family member can work on it together. So with that, let's bring Melinda back to the stage. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And let's bring her back for any Q&A that we have. Now, if you are watching this later and you have a question, again, if you see this on YouTube where we post it, or if you put a question in the chat afterwards on Crowdcast, we will do our best to answer it. And if you want to reach out to Melinda personally, we have an email address, not her specific one, but one where you can reach out to her. So let's see what we have. Let me go over to the Q&A. And the one we have is, how do I know if my insurance covers the cost of the clinical trials? How do I know if my insurance covers the cost?
Good question.
Right?
Yeah, it's never good to find out it doesn't. Um, I
Which you
think
did. I mean, you
yeah,
did.
I think since the Affordable Care Act has been put in place, most insurances do cover the cost of the standard of care, that you would have to do if you were in or not in a clinical trial anyway. So I think that has helped a lot with that. But also just reaching out to your insurance. Most insurance companies have like a patient navigator
Mm,
that you can reach out to and have them help, and they will do a pre-approval process. I think the biggest issue that I see with insurance now is if a patient wants to go from one state, but the clinical trial is in a different state at a different institution, making sure that there's approval process and covering whatever across the state lines, if the insurance will work in a different state.
yeah.
That's one issue that I've seen come up before.
Okay. All right. Let me click done answering. And oh wow, this is really interesting. So what does a clinical trial team typically consist of, and who would be my main point of contact?
Yeah, again, good questions. I think that's going to vary from trial to trial as well. You have your primary investigator. You talked about that. That is going to be the lead investigator that's running this study. And then you would probably have a research nurse,
Hmm.
um, maybe not a patient navigator, but I think for most trials, the research nurse is your main point of contact.
Hmm.
But these are the questions that you would ask when you enter into a clinical trial. When you're going, and going through the consent form and being ready to consent into a trial, those are the questions I would want to know.
Yeah.
Who's my main point of contact? How do I get a hold of them? Who do I call for an emergency? And make sure you find out all that information. The clinical trial team, I think, can be small or it can be huge. I mean, for me, I had surgeons, I had radiologists, I had the primary investigator, I had research nurses, I had a travel team who helped me get there.
That's
You know,
amazing.
I know. So it was pretty incredible, different, but keeping those roles and context information in a place for me was up to my husband to keep straight.
Yeah, another spreadsheet.
Yeah, exactly. But those are the questions. Those are the questions that you should be asking when you enroll in a clinical trial.
Great. All right. That's all the questions we have live. I have one more question for you, Melinda. Um, what advice would you give to someone today, whether it's cholangiocarcinoma or hepatocellular carcinoma, but let's say they're diagnosed with an advanced stage of cancer? Like the news blew up in the past 2 days about Princess Kate Middleton of Wales. I don't think that's exactly how you say her name, but the Princess of Wales and just blew up. They have not released the type of cancer, but we know that she had a major abdominal surgery, so that narrows it down significantly. What advice would you give to people who are diagnosed with a very advanced stage of cancer?
Absolutely check into clinical trials. Again, I agree with you, Andrea, that clinical trials should be a first option, not a last resort. I think that the up and coming science is available in clinical trials. And also, like you had stated earlier, you are more closely monitored.
Yeah.
And for diseases or cancers that don't have a curative treatment or treatment options, it is, I think, an imperative part of the treatment plan to enter
Yeah.
into clinical trial. And for some patients, probably with HCC as well, I've seen patients who have been in, 3 or more clinical trials specifically, and it has prolonged their life by having these new treatment options available to them. And not only prolonging their life, but prolonging the lives and bringing newer treatments for future patients. I think it's important to participate in clinical trials. So my advice would be to always consider a clinical trial and map out plan A, B, C, D. And part of that inclusion exclusion criteria that makes things tricky is knowing that if you enroll in a clinical trial, does that exclude treatment
Mm.
options down the road? But keeping that in mind and talking that over with your physician.
Oh gosh, that's such great advice. Melinda, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, if you are watching this later or watching clips that we're putting out and you want to get in touch with Melinda, please just comment and we will give you an email address at the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation, not her direct address. We don't want to bombard her, but with a email address for advocacy. And again, clinical trials, first option, not a last resort. And we really hope this was helpful. And please let us know about some other topics you would like to hear about in the future. Thank you so much for joining us, whether it was live or you're watching the replay on YouTube. Thank you so much, Melinda.
Thank you, Andrea.